Chapter 8. The Permit Problem. It started with a folded letter on the workshop steps. No envelope, just county letterhead, creased twice and weighted down with a rusty bolt. Jake picked it up, already feeling the cold fingers of dread working their way up his spine. Notice of temporary work suspension. The County Board of Silver Ridge has been made aware of ongoing construction at the site known as Weston Bridge. Due to pending safety assessments and questions surrounding the original permit status, all physical labor must cease immediately until further notice. No signature, no grace, just red tape dressed up in official language. Officially sterile and yet aggressively vague. Jake rubbed his face, grit clinging to his palms. The smell of wood dust still clung to his flannel, but it didn't feel like progress anymore. It felt like warning. He read the letter again, slower this time, searching for a loophole, a signature, a name to call. Nothing. Just the cold mechanics of bureaucracy grinding against something deeply personal. Perfect, he muttered. All it took was hope and a hammer to wake the sleeping giants. They hadn't even waited a full week. Grace arrived 20 minutes later, holding the same letter. Mine came with a fresh cup of denial, she said, waving the coffee thermos she'd brought him, courtesy of Rose, who is currently half convinced this is just a mix-up. Jake exhaled slowly. I don't think this is a mix-up. Grace nodded, lips pressed into a line. Victor, Jake looked up. He's behind this? Grace shrugged. Hard to prove. But he's been sniffing around the planning board again. I overheard him asking Sylvia Winston about liability clauses. Jake raised an eyebrow. Sylvia? I thought she retired. She did. Twice, Grace said with a half smile, but they pulled her back in when the council got stuck over zoning reform. She's the only one everyone halfway trusts, mostly because she listens more than she talks. Jake leaned back against the doorway frame, one hand dragging through his hair. So, now I've got red tape, a power-hungry real estate guy with a grudge, and a zoning board chaired by a retired principal with a personal notepad collection. Welcome home, Grace said, sipping her own coffee. We're quirky, not efficient. Jake remembered Sylvia from his high school years, then the no-nonsense principal with sharp heels and sharper eyes. She hadn't changed much from what he'd heard. Still walked with that quiet authority. Still showed up to every town meeting with a notepad and thermos. Still believed in keeping your opinions folded until everyone else had spoken. She was close with your mom, you know, Grace added, softer now. Back when your dad was sketching bridge plans on diner napkins, Sylvia used to say your mom was the one anchoring them both. Jake looked away. I didn't know that. Well, now you do. The air between them settled for a moment, the kind that made room for grief without demanding explanation. Jake sighed and set the letter down. He slumped into the chair behind the workbench. We finally got momentum. People are showing up. Marcus. He trailed off. What about Marcus? Grace asked. Jake looked away. He came early yesterday. Didn't say much, but he started reinforcing the joists. Even brought one of Dad's old clamps. Grace tilted her head. That's something. Yeah. And now it's all on hold. Grace leaned against the frame of the open doorway, her posture calm, but her gaze sharp. You want to quit? She asked. No. Something inside Jake was disappointed that she felt the need to ask. It was as if she was still expecting him to pack up and run again. Then don't. She took a slow step into the workshop and set the thermos on the bench beside him. If this were easy, someone else would have done it already. You're not just rebuilding a bridge. You're rebuilding trust in people, in faith, in yourself. That kind of work always gets pushback. Jake gave a wry smile. Why do I feel like that should have come with its own clipboard? Grace shrugged. I was saving it for the pep talk I plan to give you after Victor files a formal complaint. Jake let out a breath. Not quite a laugh, but close. He reached for the coffee and took a sip. Still warm and strong, much like the woman who'd brought it. Later that afternoon, Jake found Marcus at the supply shed, organizing hardware with a scowl that looked chiseled from stone. You hear? Jake asked. Marcus didn't look up. Yep. Just wanted to say, thanks for showing up yesterday. Marcus grunted, then tossed a handful of washers into a bin. Doesn't matter now, does it? Jake bristled. Of course it matters. Marcus finally looked at him. Jake, I know what it's like to work for something, sweat over it, believe in it, and have someone with power wipe it all away with a piece of paper. I lived that when Dad died. Marcus kept going, quiet now, but with the weight of years behind his words. He was gone overnight, Jake. No warning. No time to say anything that mattered. One day we were arguing about how to anchor a crossbeam, and the next, I was the one holding the plans, sorting through his tools, making decisions like I was qualified to carry his legacy. He paused, tossing another bolt into the tray like it had personally offended him. And where were you? Out chasing dreams in a city that didn't care. You were here for the funerals, Jake. I won't take that from you. But when the dust settled, I was the one standing here with the decisions nobody wanted. The bridge, Mom's things, all of it. I had to bury 2 parents and still get up for work the next morning. The words stung, but Jake didn't flinch this time. I know I left you holding more than you should have, he said, his voice low. I was drowning, Marcus. I thought distance would make it hurt less. I was wrong. And I'm sorry. Marcus's shoulders rose, then fell, like the weight wasn't gone, but maybe shifted. But I'm not leaving again. Marcus stared at him for a beat too long, then said quieter, We'll see. He turned back to the shelf, but his movements were less sharp now, slower. Jake didn't press the moment. He just picked up a box of screws and started sorting, side by side, silent, but maybe not so far apart. That evening, the town meeting convened in the old community hall. The folding chairs creaked under the weight of familiar bodies, and the fluorescent lights buzzed like they had something to say, but didn't know how. Victor Blake arrived 10 minutes early, dressed in a tailored navy suit and carrying a thick folder labeled Bridge Development Concerns. He shook hands with council members like they were poker buddies, and even kissed Mrs. Dunn's hand like a gentleman, which made her blink 3 times in rapid succession. That boy's been trouble since he was in pull-ups, she whispered to Walt, who didn't bother to whisper back when he grunted. Jake stood at the back, arms crossed, Grace at his side. The room was full. Walt, the Reyes teens, Jenny and Micah, even Sylvia Winston at the podium, expression unreadable. Victor waited until public comment. Then he stood. I want to begin by saying I respect the legacy of the Weston family, he said, voice smooth as polished stone. Jake's father was a visionary, but visions need structure, regulation, safety. He turned toward Jake without quite looking at him. And while I admire the community spirit of recent weeks, we must ask ourselves, at what cost? He opened the folder, revealing printouts of unpermitted construction activity, potential safety risks, and projected expenses the town might incur. He held up a photo, slightly grainy, clearly zoomed in, of the build site from a distance. This is not just nostalgia, he said. It's liability. The bridge was never finished for a reason, he continued. And in times like these, Silver Ridge must think forward, not backward. He sat to polite applause from a few scattered hands. Sylvia said nothing. She just tapped her pen 3 times on the podium and looked out over the crowd like she was still collecting data. Jake stepped forward to speak, but Grace touched his arm. Let me, she whispered. He hesitated, then nodded. Grace walked to the front with steady, unhurried steps. She looked over the crowd and let the silence settle before speaking. When I was 18, she began, I almost left this town. My mother had just died and all I could see was grief and old roads. But something in me knew that healing doesn't always come by leaving. Sometimes it comes by staying and helping others cross. She paused. The bridge may be old, but the need for it is new every day. Jake isn't rebuilding this bridge alone. We are. Not just for sentiment, but for connection, for the people who can't keep living on opposite sides. She turned toward Victor. We understand the need for safety, but don't confuse resistance with righteousness. A murmur rippled through the room. Low, affirming. Even Sylvia tilted her head slightly, like something had clicked into place. Then she turned to Jake, and something in her eyes said, "Keep going." Jake stepped forward slowly, the old floorboards groaning beneath his boots. He took the folded notice from his jacket pocket and held it up for a beat before setting it on the podium. "I didn't come back to stir up trouble," he began. "And I sure didn't come back with some master plan or political angle. I came because something my father started was left unfinished, and I couldn't ignore it anymore." He paused, letting his gaze move across the room, Walt's furrowed brow, Elena's hopeful eyes, Marcus still leaning in the doorway with crossed arms. "My dad believed in this town. He believed in bridges, not just the ones with beams and bolts, but the kind that close the gap between what is and what could be." Jake tapped the podium lightly, not to make a point, but to ground himself. "I didn't understand it when I was younger. I thought if I left Silver Ridge and built something big somewhere else, maybe I'd matter more. But no matter what I built, it never felt right. Because the truth is, I wasn't building anything that lasted. I wasn't building for people. I wasn't building for trust." He looked at the county letter again. "I know there are concerns, and I respect that. I want this to be done right, safe, legal, sustainable. But I also want it to be done. Because for some of us, this bridge isn't just wood and metal. It's a sign that something broken can be mended, that division can be crossed, that it's not too late to finish what matters." He exhaled slowly, eyes landing on Sylvia Winston. "I'm asking for a chance, not just for me, but for the people who showed up with gloves and hammers and muffins and prayers. We're not trying to build a monument, we're trying to build hope." He stepped back, quiet settling behind him. As Jake stepped away from the podium, the room held its breath. Then came a chair scrape. Evan Keller stood. No clipboard, no notes, just oil-stained jeans and a work shirt with his name half-faded from too many washes. He ambled up to the mic, nodded once at Jake, then turned to the room with a look that said he didn't plan to be there long. "I don't like speeches," he began, "or meetings, or suits that cost more than my truck." A few chuckles broke the tension. "But I like bridges. Real ones. Ones that connect people who haven't had a reason to cross paths in a long time." He scratched the back of his neck. "I helped build the early frame on this one, back when Jake's dad was still around, when hope came with blueprints and sawdust. Then, well, life happened. Stuff got left hanging." He looked toward Victor now, gaze steady. "Yeah, it needs to be safe. But tearing it down just because it's old or complicated? That ain't leadership. That's laziness in a suit." A low murmur of agreement rippled through the room. Evan turned back to the mic. "I showed up because I believe it's worth finishing. And I trust the guy picking up the hammer again. That's it." He gave a quick nod, then added under his breath as he stepped away, "And if the county wants to shut it down, they'd better bring more than paperwork. I've got a wrench and Wednesdays off." The laughter this time was louder, relieved, grateful. "And Jake?" Jake just smiled, the corner of his mouth twitching like he'd remembered what loyalty felt like. That night, Jake returned to the river, not to the prayer spot, but to the bridge itself. He stood where the beams had begun to rise, flashlight in hand, journal in his back pocket. The sky overhead was deep blue, scattered with stars. He sat on a support beam and opened the journal. One entry stood out, circled in faded pen. Journal entry: "When Pharaoh said no, Moses didn't go home. He stood on holy ground and listened again." Resistance doesn't mean retreat. It means recentering. TW. Jake closed the book. He didn't know what tomorrow's meeting would hold. He didn't know what Victor Blake's next move would be. But he knew this: he wasn't going home.